Ladies and gentlemen, as you've just heard, welcome aboard the Ark, the most extraordinary community of hope and optimism and vision and vitality that is being built. But it isn't like that everywhere in the world. 16 years ago, I had a conversation with a member of my staff. It went like this. Philippa, do you know that every relational encounter you have, you either leave with more power or less power? I remember being completely perplexed by the question and thinking how sad to go through life thinking that that was the dynamic in every single relational encounter. What I did not realize at the time was that I was witnessing my first introduction to the outworking of something that I would come to know as the Gramsci effect. The intentional and long march through our institutions. This profoundly negative movement, in other words, our woke culture, was going to unravel our confidence in our history. It was going to drive the collapse of the family and confuse human identity. It was going to distort business through the agendas of ESG and DEI and undermine our economies through dismantling our energy agenda. All the while, completely discrediting the concept of freedom of speech, the very tool that was going to be needed in this new world order. As we began to experience the impact of the long march through the institutions, first seen in our young, it was our academics in the UK who cried out first, and James Orr is sitting here, who was one of those academics. We began to receive calls from Oxford and Cambridge and schools around the country saying, "What is happening? These ideas are dangerous." Of course, what starts in the academy and with the educators flows downstream into the public and into the public square and into business. And as our graduates began to take up roles within the world of business, in our great companies, our business leaders were less well equipped to deal with the onslaught. It was a wise man who once said, "When one generation no longer esteems its own heritage and fails to pass the torch to its own children, it is saying, in essence, that the very foundational principles and experiences that make it the society it is are no longer valid." This was the underlying subtext of what was emerging. Even though life statistically is so much better for so many people across the world, we began to dismantle our story, our values, our family life, our very energy systems. And we're now teetering on the brink of a journey towards decline. But I didn't need to tell you my story, because each of you could tell the same story. If you are a business leader in Germany, you will be profoundly aware of this story. The story that now threatens Germany with the potential of deindustrialization. It hardly needs to be stated in this place, though, that you can't drive out a negative story by being against something. To redirect the human heart and mind, you have to create a better story, something that is good, something that is true, and something that is beautiful. You know this, and although many of us only met for the first time last night, I know that you're already giving your lives to this. So what is ARC? Many of you will have come here just having heard about it. What is ARC and why ARC? ARC is a movement of people like you and like me who are determined that it does not need to be this way. And not only that, not just determined, but that we must tell a better story, a hope-filled, positive story that gives both this generation and future generations a vision for the future. To continue with the quote from the wise man, he went on to say, "What is required when this happens, when society has lost its way, is for leaders to arise who have not forgotten the discarded legacy and who love it with all their heart." ARC is about calling leaders to arise, leaders who have not forgotten the discarded legacy and who love it with all their heart. That's what's drawn us here today. Leaders who will lead with courage and strength, and who will create and not complain, who will build and not tear down, who are relational and not extractive, and who understand that this is for the long term and not the short term. Our better story is meant to be one that inspires, encourages, and edifies, one that unifies, respects, and honors. It is the story that echoes through the historic value system of the West. This story is a familiar one to you in this room, but discarded by so many. There was once a day in Western nations where we took seriously the extraordinary value and dignity of every human being. The fact that each person was made in the image of the divine, it profoundly impacted the very foundations and fabric of our civilization. It was this truth that permeated every aspect of the woven fabric of our societies, that the pillars of our society were erected upon: freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, freedom to meet and to gather. These freedoms led to a conviction that society works best when my right to what I've created and built is protected, the rule of law is upheld, and the democratic order is established. Over this, our forefathers laid a code that recognized that human beings flourish when their relationships were governed by kindness, truth, gentleness, respect, and goodness. ARC has been created to rediscover this story, to unearth and reveal the better story. We're asking several questions that we think are fundamental. First, can we find a unifying story that will guide us as we make our way forward? What is the proper role for the family, the community, and the nation in creating the conditions for prosperity? How do we govern our corporate, social, and political organizations so that we promote free exchange and abundance while protecting ourselves against the ever-present danger of cronyism and corruption? And finally, as we go through a generational energy transition, how do we provide the energy and the resources upon which all economies depend in a manner that is inexpensive, reliable, safe, and efficient? We are aware that we are meeting at a time when many of our nations are internally divided, where intolerance is on the rise, and where we are facing geostrategic threat rooted in the weakness of the West. So ARC exists to investigate how we've arrived at this defining moment for our societies, debate what needs to be renewed, and finally identify a clear path forward full of strength, vision, and hope. And then to connect change makers in networks like this one to drive change practically. It's worth returning to the story of my academic friends that I started with at the beginning. Those academics who called me after ringing me about academic freedom on campus, got together and did something. We organised academics, politicians, journalists into a network that could push back. That group changed the law in the name of freedom of speech. It defended academic freedom at Cambridge from serious attacks. And it changed the debate in the media and the public square. We at ARC are seeking to seed groups of change makers around the world. This is our first gathering in Germany, and I can only imagine where this community will go over the next 5 to 10 years. You can feel it in this room. It is palpable. As I close, let us remember that the genius of the West lies in the fact that our archetypal story is not centered on a totalitarian power dynamic. Rather, our civilizational story is centered on sacrifice, courage, and love. We are pursuing that better story, and we are modeling it on those principles. That's why we are rooting it in the infinite value of each human being, built on the foundations of freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, freedom to assembly, and woven together with kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control by responsible people. This is a profoundly better story. Thank you.